I'll jump over theories, but if anyone is interested in theory, there's a paper on SIC's website looking at the theoretical underpinnings of social innovation from people like Joseph Schumpeter, Brian Arthur, Rosabeth Moss-Kanter, Charles Darwin, so on. There's a sort of emerging debate about the intellectual underpinnings of this field. And I'll just finish then with saying a little bit about where I think this is heading now, if I can. I think what we're going to see quite quickly is a growth of this field. Partly, I think it's going to be driven by finance. This is a field which has lacked finance in the past, but is beginning to get quite big sources. So in the UK, I mentioned this new bank, Big Society Capital. In Europe, it's not just the ones I mentioned, but the European Investment Bank, European Investment Fund is getting into this space too. I was just saying to Sim earlier, India looks likely to have a $1 billion social innovation fund launched early next year. And with finance will come much more attention to method and practice. A critical issue for finance, as for everything else, is how do you measure success? How do you measure impact? How do you make decisions? How do you know what's a good idea or what's a bad idea? And a lot of work underway across the world on that. I think we haven't really got it embedded in policy, but this is beginning to happen. And a critical, I think probably the top priority, which was identified by every time we brought the field from across the world together, was a sense that we needed to be much more systematic about the craft skills, the methods of social innovation. And trials have been happening this year of something called the Global Innovation Academy in Spain, Hong Kong. There's one 2 weeks' time in Singapore, trying to systematize what skills do you need to do this well. How to use design skills, how to incubate, how to finance, how to evaluate. And it'd be good to see some of that happening here. And I'll just end with what I think is a parallel. And I mentioned this at the thing I was at in Pärnu yesterday. In 1945 in the US, there was a remarkable moment when a man called Vannevar Bush, who was running the US mainly military technology effort in the Second World War, wrote a memorandum to his president which essentially said that doing science systematically would be the single most important thing that the US should do after the Second World War. And he advocated an enormous increase of public investment in science, the creation of a National Science Foundation, getting money to young researchers to explore their ideas, and then a whole architecture of helping that science flow out into industry. Within 20 years, that had essentially sort of grown the US science system, venture capital, technology transfer, Silicon Valley, and so on. 40% of Silicon Valley money came from government in the US, and a whole system which really gave the US technological dominance for more than half a century. I think we're at a very similar moment in relation to social innovation, where in a way there's always been social innovation, just as there had long been a lot of scientific activity, but it's just beginning to be recognized. This has to be put on an entirely new footing, just as science was in the 50s and 60s in the US. Much more systematically funded, organized, mobilized, much more systematic, scanning globally for knowledge and scaling up. And what makes it exciting as a field, to me at least, is that no one quite knows where it will go. It is a very dynamic, very evolving field, and it's a field where no country has a particular advantage. It's as likely the best ideas will be coming from Korea or Bangladesh or Chile as it is that they will come from Britain or Germany or the USA. And a very interesting thing will happen, is it next week? 2 weeks' time? That probably are the main partner of SIX in Korea is running to be mayor of Seoul. And he's ahead in the opinion polls. And so a lead social innovator from civil society may become mayor of a city of 12 million people with, I think, a stronger tax base than New York or London or Paris or any big cities. So we may see, say, a very striking sort of jump in terms of exemplifying social innovation from a civil society activist in the city which happens to be the most wired city on earth, with faster broadband and a stronger technology sector. But that's just an example of this field being very dynamic and very hard to predict, and therefore interesting.